The digital silence had become a physical weight. For weeks, the world had watched, whispered, and worried, scrolling past a void where updates from a beloved figure should have been. Princess Catherine, the future queen, had vanished from the public eye following planned abdominal surgery, and the carefully calibrated machinery of the modern monarchy seemed to stutter. Official statements were brief, clinical, and followed by an unnerving quiet. The palace walls, usually so adept at managing the narrative, appear to have sealed shut. In the absence of facts, a churning sea of speculation had flooded the internet, a toxic mix of well-meaning concern, bizarre conspiracy theories, and tabloid desperation. Each silent day amplified the public's anxiety, turning concern into a collective, breathless vigil. Then, on a crisp morning that felt no different from the anxious ones before it, the change was subtle. A new post appeared on the official social media channels. The subject line was simple, an update on the Princess of Wales. For millions around the globe, their fingers trembling slightly over phone screens and keyboards, this was the moment. This was the long-awaited signal in the fog. They clicked, bracing for more formal, distant words. But what they saw next was not a cold medical bulletin. It was a photograph. There was Catherine, sitting on a garden bench, surrounded by spring blooms, her smile familiar, yet touched by a visible resilience, her gaze clear and direct. The caption, written in her own voice, began not with a royal we, but with a personal I. The reaction was not a slow build. It was a seismic release. A global community, held in suspense for what felt like an eternity, exhaled as one. This was the hook, the authentic, human connection they had been yearning for. It wasn't just an update. It was a reassurance, a shared moment of relief that would begin to untangle the web of worry that had bound them all. The photograph itself became an instant artifact, scrutinized not with suspicion, but with profound relief. The princess wore a simple striped sweater and jeans, her hair loose in the wind. The setting was clearly the grounds of Windsor, with the tender green of new leaves blurring in the soft focus background. She looked, to the overwhelming majority, like someone on the mend, perhaps thinner, the lines around her eyes speaking of a difficult journey, but fundamentally herself. The smile reached her eyes. The accompanying words were a masterclass in balanced transparency. She spoke of the incredible medical team, to whom she was enormously grateful, anchoring her recovery in professional care. She addressed the public directly. "Thank you for all the wonderful messages of support and for your understanding whilst I have been recovering." It was the acknowledgement of the public's role in her life that resonated deeply. Then, with a graceful pivot, she touched on the need for privacy for her family, for time, space, and privacy as her recovery continued, and, most poignantly, for her children. She explained she was now in a phase of preventative chemotherapy, a phrase that landed with a thud but was framed within a narrative of hope and proactive health. She ended not as a patient, but as a mother, a wife, and a public servant. "I am well and getting stronger every day by focusing on the things that will help me heal in my mind, body, and spirits. I look forward to being back when I am ready, but for now, I must focus on making a full recovery." The statement was a key that unlocked a dam. Comment sections, which had been battlegrounds of rumor, transformed. "We love you, Catherine. Stay strong, our princess. So brave, so honest." The emojis were hearts, praying hands, and crying faces of joy. On forums like Royal Forums and Mumsnet, threads that had spiraled into fear suddenly righted themselves. "She looks amazing," wrote one user. "You can see the strength in her. That's our girl." Another posted, "I'm not ashamed to say I burst into tears. Just pure relief." This was the authentic hook, not a manufactured cliffhanger, but the resolution of a shared human anxiety. The public hadn't just received news. They had been entrusted with a vulnerable truth, and they embraced it with a protective, joyful ferocity. The shift was palpable. News anchors, who had been forced to discuss the mystery for weeks, now had genuine, hopeful material. Their tones softened from speculative to supportive. Social media algorithms, once feeding on controversy, now amplified a wave of positive sentiment. The narrative was no longer about absence, but about resilience. People shared their own stories of recovery, of battling illness, of the importance of family support, using Catherine's update as a catalyst for their own vulnerable conversations. She had, in her grace, given permission for a global discussion framed not in fear, but in solidarity and hope. The overwhelming joy was not just about her health. It was about the restoration of a connection that felt threatened. It was the joy of a conversation resumed with a dear friend after a frightening silence. In the immediate aftermath of the update, a remarkable societal recalibration began. The frantic, often grotesque, digital hunt for clues ground to a halt. The grainy, long-lens photographs from dubious sources that had fueled so much speculation were now ignored or met with angry rebuttals. "Give her peace" became a common reply to any post that seemed to intrude. The public had what it needed: truth delivered with dignity. This collective shift from consumers of rumor to guardians of privacy was one of the most striking aspects of the story. It was as if the nation and the world had taken a deep, collective breath and decided to respect the very boundaries the princess had gently outlined. Media outlets, sensing the change in the wind, pivoted their coverage. Front pages that had screamed with questionable headlines now carried the beautiful garden photo with respectful, supportive captions. Television segments featured medical experts explaining preventative chemotherapy in hopeful, accessible terms, demystifying the process and aligning public understanding with the princess's own brave framing. Talk shows hosted discussions on the importance of mental health during recovery, on the challenges of parenting while unwell, and on the modern public's right to know versus an individual's right to heal. The conversation had matured overnight. Within the walls of royal residences, the update served as a profound relief of a different kind. For Prince William, it marked the end of an agonizing period of balancing his roles as a protector, a father, and a future king under immense, silent pressure. Sources close to the couple suggested the decision to release the statement and photo was deeply personal, taken after many long family discussions. Catherine had reportedly been determined to speak herself, to control the narrative of her own health in a way that felt authentic. The photo, taken by William himself a few days prior in a quiet moment at home, was a deliberate choice, a window into their private world, but one they chose to open themselves. The children, who had been shielded with immense care, were now operating in an atmosphere where the external noise had suddenly stilled. They could visit their mother in the hospital or at home without the same piercing scrutiny. The family's focus could return from crisis management to simple, healing routine. Homework at the kitchen table, quiet afternoons watching films, the normalcy that forms the bedrock of recovery. For the wider institution of the monarchy, the update was a case study in modern crisis communication. The initial, sparse approach had arguably backfired, allowing the information vacuum to fester. But the corrective, personal, visually compelling, and emotionally resonant was near perfect. It demonstrated that in the digital age, authenticity holds more power than obfuscation. It showed a royal family not as remote figureheads, but as a unit navigating a universal human challenge with courage and unity. Senior aides, who had been under fire, could now operate from a position of clarity. The Cambridge strategy, often praised for its relatability, had faced its sternest test and, with this personal intervention from its principal, had ultimately prevailed. The public's overwhelming positive response was also a political asset, solidifying the couple's immense popularity and reinforcing the monarchy's connection to the public through shared emotion rather than mere pageantry. The joy expressed by the public was not a passive feeling. It manifested in 1,000 tangible, creative acts of support. This was the chapter where empathy took physical form. Outside the gates of Windsor Castle and Kensington Palace, the floral tributes began to appear. But these were not the somber bouquets of a passing. They were vibrant, hopeful arrangements. Bunches of daffodils, tulips, and forget-me-nots were left with handwritten notes saying, "For our princess on her way back to us," or "Thinking of you and your beautiful family." Children's drawings were laminated and tied to the palace gates, crayon portraits of Catherine with a crown, or of a family of 6 holding hands under a rainbow. A grassroots movement, organized entirely online, saw thousands of people planting Catherine's crocuses or other spring bulbs in their gardens, parks, and window boxes, creating a living, growing wave of support that would bloom for years to come. Online, the creativity exploded. Digital artists created stunning portraits of the princess, not in formal tiaras, but surrounded by symbols of strength: lions, oak trees, phoenixes. A composer wrote a simple, beautiful piano piece titled "For Catherine," which went viral. Knitters and crafters across the globe began the Rosy Recovery Project, creating cozy, pink blankets to be donated to cancer support centers in the princess's name, turning their anxious energy into comfort for others. On social media, the hashtag #WeAreWithYouCatherine became a mosaic of goodwill. People posted photos of their own recovery milestones, of quiet cups of tea enjoyed in solidarity, of walks in nature taken in the spirit of healing she had described. The public's joy was actively weaving a global blanket of support. This period also saw a significant, measurable impact on charitable organizations. The princess's mention of her mental and physical well-being triggered a surge in traffic to sites associated with mental health charities like Mind and Young Minds. Donations to cancer research charities, particularly those focused on early detection and prevention, saw a sharp uptick. The conversation around preventative chemotherapy, once a niche medical term, was now mainstream, leading to reports of increased inquiries for routine health checkups, a phenomenon dubbed the Catherine effect by public health observers. This was the true power of her position, using personal experience to drive positive public action without a single explicit instruction. The monarchy's soft power was on full display, not through grand tours or state banquets, but through shared vulnerability. Meanwhile, the tabloid press, now firmly on the back foot, had to completely reinvent their approach. The newspapers that had run the most sensational headlines now faced reader backlash and a stark drop in credibility. They embarked on a campaign of rehabilitation, running long, sympathetic features about cancer survivors, the history of royal illnesses handled with dignity, and analyses of William and Catherine's unbreakable bond. The predatory paparazzi found their market had dried up. Editors were no longer willing to pay for invasive photos, knowing the public reception would be disastrous. A new, unspoken contract seemed to be in place. The family had offered truth and requested privacy. The people, in their joyful relief, were now fiercely enforcing that bargain on their behalf. As spring deepened into early summer, the public's relationship with the princess entered a new, patient phase. The initial explosion of joy settled into a steady, warm glow of support. The update had provided a roadmap, and the people were content to follow it, trusting in the timeline she had implicitly set. There were no demands for appearances, no frustration at the continued absence from the public roster. Instead, a culture of quiet cheering took hold. When the palace, in a low-key update, mentioned she had been undertaking light desk work and was kept abreast of her patronage's projects, it was met with approving nods. It was proof of progress on her terms. The few sanctioned glimpses were treasured. A brief, casual mention by Prince William during an engagement that she was doing well, thank you, was enough to fuel another wave of supportive headlines. A photograph of her handwritten note to a children's hospice, released by the organization, sparked delight. Her familiar cursive was another tiny anchor to normalcy. The public had become adept at reading the signs of a quiet, steady recovery, and each one was celebrated not with fanfare, but with a collective, satisfied smile. This period was crucial for Catherine's actual healing. Freed from the corrosive pressure of speculation, the family could focus on the mundane, essential rhythms of convalescence. Her recovery was not linear. There were good days and more challenging ones, but they were navigated within the safe harbor of home. William adjusted his schedule to be present more, often seen doing the school run or popping to a local shop, embodying the role of a supportive husband and hands-on father. The children's routines, school, sports, playdates, provided a vital structure and sense of continuity. The palace, learning from the earlier communications misstep, instituted a new policy of small, factual updates. They were infrequent, but consistent, always focusing on forward momentum. She was enjoying short walks. She had celebrated a family birthday. She was reviewing plans for a future project. This managed expectations and maintained trust. The narrative was firmly under the family's control. Behind the scenes, Catherine began to tentatively re-engage with the work that gave her purpose. From Adelaide Cottage, she would have video calls with the team from her early years foundation, discussing research and strategy. This intellectual engagement, connected to her life's passion, was a key part of her spiritual recovery. She was not just a patient. She was a visionary reconnecting with her mission. This slow, deliberate reintegration was the antithesis of a rushed return. It was a lesson in prioritizing long-term health over short-term public expectation. The public, in turn, respected this pace completely. They'd been entrusted with the truth, and they were proving worthy of that trust by offering the greatest gift they could, patience, and the space for her to heal properly. The story of the health update and its aftermath culminated not in a dramatic return to the balcony, but in a profound and lasting transformation of the dynamic between the princess and the world. The experience forged a deeper, more mature connection, one tempered by shared adversity and profound relief. The public had witnessed the humanity behind the title in its most vulnerable state, and instead of diminishing her, it had elevated her in their hearts. She was no longer just a beautiful, dutiful princess. She was a symbol of resilience, a mother fighting for her family, a woman facing a profound challenge with public grace and private courage. This added a new, formidable layer to her public identity. For the institution, the crisis, and its resolution became a blueprint. The lessons were clear. In the face of a personal health crisis, initial opacity breeds chaos, but a timely, authentic, and personal communication can disarm speculation, build immense goodwill, and even strengthen the bond with the public. The monarchy had learned it could be vulnerable and survive, even thrive. The never complain, never explain mantra had been judiciously updated for a social media age where explanation, when done on one's own terms, could be a powerful tool for connection. When the day finally came for Catherine's first tentative public appearance, a low-key, local visit, perhaps to a community garden or a children's center, the atmosphere was electric with a quiet, profound respect. There would be no screaming crowds, but tears in the eyes of well-wishers, soft cheers, and a palpable sense of gratitude. She would look radiant, her smile easy, her interactions genuine. The journey back to full-time duty would be gradual, but the public would celebrate each step not as an obligation met, but as a gift received. The overwhelming joy that greeted the initial update had matured into a deep, abiding respect and a protective love. The story that began with an anxious digital silence ended with a powerful, unspoken understanding. The palace had shared a truth, and the people, overwhelmed with joy, had in return given the princess something priceless: the peace to recover, and the unwavering knowledge that when she was ready, her public would be waiting, not as spectators, but as a global family that had stood with her and would continue to do so. The crisis, therefore, became a cornerstone. It proved that the modern relevance of the monarchy could be rooted not in pomp and distance, but in shared human experience, in resilience, and in the powerful, authentic joy that comes from seeing a loved one on the path to wellness. This response is AI generated and for reference purposes only.